There's a kind of quiet only a lake can give you in the early morning. That hush of water, so still it mirrors the clouds. The air just cool enough to remind you you're alive. For the last 20 years, that lake was my solace. After the army, after the noise, after losing my dad, it became my peace. I moved into the cul-de-sac on Pine Hollow Drive 11 years ago. The house wasn't anything special. Brick exterior, aging deck, a few stubborn shingles that loved to fly off in storm season. But out back, tucked behind a line of dogwoods, was my slice of heaven. A natural lake about 3 acres wide. Not city-owned, not fenced, not touched. It straddled the edge of the HOA's official jurisdiction, right at the back of the community. Half of it was technically on my land. Half of it, well, that's where things got complicated. I'd always kept an eye on it. Trimmed the brush, cleared out beer cans after rowdy teenagers left their mess, even stocked it with bass a few springs back. I knew every ripple, every croak of frog at night. That lake wasn't just scenery, it was legacy. My father and I used to fish there. He taught me how to cast a line with still hands and quiet feet. He died in that lake too, years before I bought the property. They called it an accident, slipped off his canoe. No signs of foul play. I never quite believed it. 2 months ago, the water changed. It started with a sheen, a thin, almost oily film that caught the sunrise wrong. Then came the smell. Sour, metallic, like rotting batteries. The cattails turned yellow. Dead fish floated belly up on the western edge. I spotted a turtle dragging itself through the sludge that didn't belong in a natural body of water. I called the HOA first. I figured it was the right thing to do. After all, their drainage pipes fed stormwater into the lake. Maybe something upstream had backed up. Maybe fertilizer runoff from a nearby lawn. I wasn't looking to start a fight. But the moment I brought it up to Janice from the HOA board, her voice tensed. "We don't manage the lake," she said flatly. "I know," I replied, trying to keep things cordial. "But some of your runoff drains into it, and the whole ecosystem. The HOA has no legal responsibility over that area," she interrupted. "If there's a problem, you'll need to take it up with the county. Janice, half that lake's behind my fence. I just want to test the water. Maybe dredge the shoreline a bit. I'm not asking for your permission, just a little coordination." There was a pause. She spoke slower this time. "I would strongly recommend you leave it alone. Stirring up old sediment can be dangerous." Dangerous. That word stuck with me. She didn't sound like someone concerned about environmental risk. She sounded guarded, like someone hiding something. That's when the letters started. 3 days after our call, I got an official warning taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized environmental modifications are prohibited within HOA buffer zones. It cited bylaw 14.6 and some obscure regulation about community green space. I checked the maps. My land ran right to the shoreline. No buffer zone, no easement. Then came the courtesy visit. A man named Craig from the HOA Compliance Committee came knocking. Friendly smile. "Fake as hell. Just checking in," he said. "You haven't started any digging or water treatments, have you?" "Why would that be your business?" I asked. "Just want to make sure we're all playing by the rules, sir. These ecosystems are delicate." I shut the door on him before he finished that sentence. The next week, I got 2 more letters. One from the HOA, another from a law firm they kept on retainer. The latter was dressed up in legalese, but it boiled down to a threat. "If you proceed with any unauthorized environmental disruption, we will pursue injunctive relief and fines up to $5,000 per day." That's when my stomach turned. This wasn't about a lake. This was about keeping me out. I walked the perimeter every morning with a thermos of black coffee and a notepad. I took photos. I marked where the water was receding, where strange sediment clumped along the shore. One morning I spotted 2 men in reflective vests crouching by the northeast bank. They weren't county workers, and I checked. They weren't HOA maintenance either. They were digging quietly and left in a nondescript black truck before I could get close. That night I stood at the lake's edge with a flashlight. I don't know what I was hoping to see, or ghosts maybe, but as the wind rustled the treetops, I kept thinking of my father, of his canoe, the way it was found half submerged, how the coroner ruled it a tragic fall even though he was a strong swimmer and a sober man. Something never added up. Now I was sure of it. That lake was hiding something, and the HOA knew exactly what it was. Whatever it was, they were terrified I'd find it. And I planned to. You know how a dog can smell fear? I've spent enough time in war zones and courtrooms to know people give off a similar stench. Something in the way their eyes twitch or how quickly they shift the conversation. The HOA wasn't just being bureaucratic. They were scared. And that fear made me curious. The more they insisted I leave the lake alone, the more I became convinced something was buried beneath its surface. Something they didn't want unearthed. After their cease and desist letter, I did what any stubborn retired officer with too much time on his hands would do. I went straight to the county registrar's office and requested everything they had on the lake. Old survey maps, water easements, drainage plans, environmental reports, and most of it was boring stuff. Old utility lines and outdated zoning codes. But then I found a survey from 1998 that made my pulse tick. There was a notation on the map, storm containment site decommissioned. I recognized the name of the engineering firm on the documents, Harker and Bluestone. They'd gone under in the early 2000s after a scandal involving illegal waste storage. The lake had once been part of a storm overflow project. But what exactly had been contained there? I asked the clerk behind the desk if there had ever been any EPA filings. She raised an eyebrow, typed something into her terminal, then told me some of the older records had been archived physically. She said I'd need to request access through the county environmental office. I thanked her, took copies of everything I could get, and walked out into the afternoon sun feeling like I'd just pulled a loose thread on a decades-old secret. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a beer in one hand and a red pen in the other, circling the names of every contractor who'd been involved in the original site work near the lake. I made calls. Most numbers were disconnected. A few led to dead ends. Retirees who remembered working there but weren't allowed to talk about the details. That phrase again. That hush. That fear. The next morning I found tire tracks near the edge of the lake. The same muddy path those reflective vest men had been standing near a week ago. And fresh ones too. I hadn't told a soul I was investigating. So why were people showing up in the middle of the night? I installed a trail camera on a pine tree just out of sight. Military-grade infrared. Not one of those cheap ones for spotting deer. I rigged another one lower near the waterline, and then I waited. Meanwhile, the HOA began their next move. This time it wasn't letters. It was something more insidious. I went out to check my mailbox and found it missing, ripped clean from its post, bolts snapped. When I called the county to report vandalism, they told me they'd received a complaint from the HOA claiming I had installed unauthorized signage near community property. I hadn't, but I did, have a printed photo of my fully intact mailbox from the day before, time-stamped, and I sent it to the county office. They dropped the complaint, but the message was clear. They were escalating. That week, I got 3 more code violations taped to my front door. Grass 1 inch too long, fence panel slightly warped, solar panel improperly angled, all of them petty. All of them timed the day after I filed a request with the environmental office for access to the archived reports on the lake. Coincidence? Not a chance. I knew harassment when I saw it, and I also knew how to respond. So I called an old friend, Donnie, a lawyer who owed me a favor from years back when I helped him with a veterans housing project. I told him I didn't want to sue the HOA yet, but I needed to know how to protect myself as I moved forward with my lake cleanup. Start with documentation, he said. Log everything, date, time, witnesses. If they come at you with legal threats, we'll file a preemptive motion. But tread carefully. You're poking a nest. I think I already kicked it, I muttered. Then came the photos. 2 days later, I pulled the SD card from the trail cam. What I saw made my blood run cold. 4:47 a.m. A white Ford pickup parked at the edge of the lake. 2 men got out, faces hidden by hoods. One held a long pole, the other what looked like a black hose. They were draining something illegally into the lake. I enhanced the images and zoomed in. The truck had an HOA sticker on the windshield. It was one of the maintenance vehicles. I'd seen it parked near the clubhouse 100 times. They weren't just trying to hide the past. They were still dumping into the water. I emailed the photos to Donnie. He called back 20 minutes later. We're done playing nice, he said. I'm filing a formal complaint with the County Environmental Division and sending a copy to the press. You keep that camera rolling and get a second opinion on that water. Independent lab, not the HOA's guy. By the end of that week, I'd submitted water samples to a lab in Asheville and filed my own cease and desist against the HOA for trespassing and property damage. I knew they'd try to weasel out of it, but at least it was a paper trail, a declaration of war. If you will, I thought of my father again, how he used to tell me, when they want you quiet, it's because you're close to the truth. He was a stubborn man, proud. And now I realized, if he knew something about this lake, if he saw something before he died, maybe his drowning hadn't been so simple after all. I looked out the window at the water line as the sun set behind the hills. The lake seemed still again, but I knew better now. Still water wasn't always peaceful, always clean, and whatever was beneath that surface, I was getting closer to the truth. I've learned over the years that if you're going to go up against a system, especially one as entrenched and smug as an HOA, you don't do it half-cocked. You document. You cross every T, dot every I, and file every form 3 copies deep. So, the morning after I received the images from my trail cam, I drove to the county office and submitted a formal environmental maintenance and dredging permit request for the lake section that legally sat on my property. The clerk looked surprised when I slid the form across her desk. She squinted at the address, then tapped something into her system. "That's part of the Pine Hollow HOA, isn't it?" she asked. "Technically, yes," I said, "but my deed shows the shoreline and a good 15 feet beyond is private. I own it, no easement, no conservation overlay, and I have a hydrology report showing the buildup of unnatural sediment." She gave a half nod, impressed but cautious. "Okay. You're filing for dredging, not structural changes?" "No structures," I said. "Just removal of waste, foreign debris, and vegetation that's strangling the shore. If anything, I'm improving water quality." I paid the fee, took my stamped copy, and left with a pit in my stomach. I knew what was coming, and it didn't take long. That night, I got a knock at the door, a certified letter, signature required. I signed, closed the door, and opened it under the kitchen light. Cease and desist, from the law offices of Trower and Grimm, representing the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. The language was as sharp as it was arrogant. "It has come to our attention that you are engaging in unauthorized and potentially destructive alterations to environmentally sensitive land that falls under HOA regulatory purview. Your permit filing with the county was noted. We hereby demand that you immediately cease all activities and communications related to said alterations. Further attempts will be viewed as malicious interference and will be met with litigation and fines." They had copied the county. They wanted to paint me as a rogue actor, some hothead trying to ruin community land. They even included an attachment claiming I had already disrupted native plant habitats. I hadn't touched a damn thing. I called Donnie again. "They're trying to box you in legally," he said. "Classic play. If they make enough noise, the county might stall or revoke your permit just to avoid the headache. So what do I do?" "You go louder," I took his advice. I called WQLR, the local news station. I spoke to a junior reporter named Emily who seemed skeptical, until I told her I had footage of HOA vehicles dumping unknown material into the lake at night. Her tone changed immediately. "Can you email me the photos?" "I'll do one better," I said. "Meet me at the lake tomorrow morning. I'll show you everything." That night, I pulled out the floodlights from my garage and mounted them along the back fence facing the lake. I wasn't just cleaning anymore. I was staging a battleground. The next morning, Emily showed up with a notepad and camera crew in tow. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a face that said she'd seen enough small-town scandals to know where smoke meant fire. I walked her around the lake, pointed out the oil-like sheen, the clusters of dead minnows, the odd barrel half buried in the bank. "You think the HOA's been dumping waste here?" she asked. "I know they have," I said, handing her a USB drive. "These photos are from last week. That's their truck. Their guys. Look at the sticker on the windshield." She stared at the screen, zoomed in, and muttered a soft, "Damn." As we were walking back toward my house, a black SUV screeched around the corner and parked halfway on the curb. Out stepped Janice H., president, in all her fire-breathing fury. "You have no right to bring outsiders into private HOA property," she shouted, marching toward us with a clipboard and a scowl. Emily didn't even blink. "Hi, I'm with WQLR. We're doing a story on lake pollution and environmental safety. Do you represent the HOA?" Janice froze like she'd just realized the gun was pointed at her. "I need you to stop recording," she stammered. "You're trespassing." "No, ma'am," Emily said calmly. "We're on Mr. Harlow's property and we're recording with his permission." Janice's mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning puppet. Then she spun toward me. "You're violating HOA confidentiality agreements." You're destabilizing this community. This community deserves to know what's poisoning their lake, I replied. And what's being buried in it. She shoved a folded paper into my hand. Final warning. The board is preparing to escalate. I watched her storm off to the SUV, kicking up gravel as it roared away. Emily turned to me, eyes alight. You weren't exaggerating. That's not even the worst of it, I said. Wait until you see what's buried under that water. And I meant it. Because while I had a permit in motion and a reporter now on my side, I still hadn't dredged a single inch. Not yet, but I was about to. The backhoe arrived that weekend. I'd hired a local contractor with lake experience and an iron stomach. I didn't tell him the whole story, just enough to prepare him. We roped off the area, marked the deepest silt zones, and by Monday we were ready to break ground. I stood at the edge, hand resting on the wooden handle of a rake, watching that machine dip its claw into the murky, foul-smelling water. The first scoop brought up mud and decayed branches. The second brought up torn netting, old beer bottles, a rusted lawn chair. But the third scoop made the machine operator stop cold. Hey, he called out, you're going to want to see this. He raised the claw, and as the sun hit it just right, I saw the edge of something flat and gray, concrete, smooth, rectangular, buried under 2 feet of sludge. And from the crack running across its surface, a slow ooze of black liquid seeped out and dropped into the water like ink. The lake had just started talking, and I had a feeling it was going to tell me everything. They told me it was an accident. That's how they always start, right? That's how they wrap it up quickly so no one asks the wrong questions, so no one has to deal with messy truths. 12 years ago, my father's body was pulled from the far side of this very lake, face down, bloated, lungs full of water. He'd gone out in the early morning to fish same way he always did, in the same little green canoe I now kept tied to a peg by my fence. When I got the call, I was deployed overseas. The words barely reached me through the static, but the weight of them did. Unfortunate accident, they'd said. He must have fallen. We're so sorry. I flew home 2 weeks later to bury him. He'd been living in this house, my house now, for nearly 15 years. A quiet man, ex-firefighter, widowed. Didn't cause trouble. Kept to himself but loved the lake. That was his sanctuary. And when I returned from the army and bought the house from his estate, I inherited more than a mortgage. I inherited the feeling that something about his death never quite added up. His canoe wasn't capsized when they found it. It was upright, tethered to a stump by the north shore. No signs of struggle, no scratches on his arms or hands, but he'd worn a life vest religiously. Always had since Mom died. I remember him yelling at me once when I tried to paddle without it. And yet when they pulled him out of that water, the vest was missing. They found it 2 days later, sliced clean down the middle, floating near the shallow inlet. The police had no answers, no motive. The autopsy said drowning. That was that. But the concrete slab dredged up this week, oozing black like some foul wound in the earth, felt like a ghost dragging its chains out of the past. That wasn't construction debris. That was a tombstone, a cap, a secret meant to stay buried. And I knew then, standing ankle-deep in mud with that memory burning in my chest, that this wasn't just about pollution or property rights anymore. This was personal. This was blood deep. 15 minutes later, she called back. Mr. Harlow, she said, we're dispatching a field investigator tomorrow morning. Do not continue dredging. Seal the area off. If you have any signs of leakage or vapor, call 911 and evacuate. I hung up and stood there just breathing. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was vindication. I was right. They'd buried something under my lake. Something illegal. And now the government knew it too. That night I sat by the shoreline with a flashlight and my father's notebook in my lap. The page I kept rereading was from April 28th. His final entry. If something happens to me, I want Luke to know this lake ain't right. He had no idea how right he was. Around 2 a.m. I heard tires crunching on gravel again. This time I didn't hesitate. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my phone, and walked around the back of the house. A truck was parked by the trail entrance, black, no markings. Its headlights were off. By the time I got close enough to see who was inside, the engine revved and it peeled away. No license plate, just taillights disappearing into the dark. They were still trying to silence me, but they were too late. The next morning, the EPA showed up in a marked van. Rebecca herself stepped out, flanked by 2 technicians in blue jackets and gloves. I gave them access to everything: photos, samples, the dredge machine's intake barrel. They took water samples, soil cores, and several pieces of what Chase and I had recovered. "This isn't just an environmental violation," Rebecca said after testing one of the sealed pipes. "This is industrial waste, and it was deliberately buried." "Any idea how old it is?" I asked. "Hard to say. Could be 10, 15 years, maybe more. Depends on the rate of decomposition. But it's not accidental. Somebody tried to cap this stuff and hide it." I nodded slowly. "Then they killed my father to protect it." Rebecca didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me, she believed me. As she and her team worked, more HOA members gathered at the path above. One of them had a phone out filming us. Another was on a call, pacing. They were losing control. I walked up the hill and stood just close enough for them to hear. "This is a federal investigation now," I said loudly. "If you interfere, that's obstruction, and I'll make sure every one of your names is on the record." They didn't respond. Just stood there, silent, pale, because they knew. They knew what we'd found wasn't just sludge and pipes. It was evidence of a cover-up, of a death, and of something they could never bury deep enough. They came at dawn. I was sipping my second cup of coffee, watching Rebecca's team run soil samples along the containment pit. The early fog was lifting when I heard a car door slam, followed by heavy heels on pavement. Janice, the HOA president, was striding down my driveway like she owned it, 2 board members trailing behind her. Rick, the smug real estate agent, and Gloria, who never spoke unless it was to motion for a vote. Janice didn't bother with greetings. "Luke," she barked, "you are violating at least 4 HOA bylaws. Section 9.3, Section 12.1, Section..." "Janice," I interrupted calmly, "there's a federal team on my property. If you keep shouting, I'll let them assume you're interfering." Her lips twitched. She wasn't used to being interrupted. "You're causing a panic in the neighborhood. Do you realize the liability you're creating? Heavy machinery, exposed soil." I held up the EPA directive Rebecca had emailed me. "They've ordered containment." "I'm complying with federal law. You're not." Janice snatched the paper, scanning it, her face twisting. "This doesn't mean you're immune from HOA enforcement," she hissed. "Try it," I said, stepping closer. "I'll subpoena every email, every meeting note, every text you ever sent about this lake. You knew something was buried here. Maybe not what, but you knew. And now it's out." Rick raised his hands nervously. "Look, maybe we can discuss this civilly, off the record." "There is no off the record," I snapped. "There's an EPA investigation. There are press inquiries. There's a death." Gloria froze. "What do you mean, a death?" "My father," I said quietly. 12 years ago. He wrote about illegal dumping in that lake. 2 days later, he was found drowned. And you people did nothing." Janice's expression flickered, shock, guilt, then fury. "Your father was a troubled man." "Careful," I growled. She flinched. Rebecca appeared behind me. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "Are these individuals authorized to be here?" Janice stammered. "We're the HOA board." "That's not an answer," Rebecca said coldly. "You are not law enforcement. This is a protected site under federal investigation. If you obstruct, I'll report it." Janice's face went white. Rick mumbled something about a misunderstanding, and Gloria turned away. They left, no more threats, no more citations, just silence. But that wasn't the end. That afternoon, a certified letter showed up again. Same legal firm. This time it accused me of defaming the HOA. Donnie, my lawyer friend, read it and laughed. "Good," he said. "They're desperate." He drafted a response citing anti-SLAPP statutes and threatened counter-litigation if they pursued it. That evening, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Beasley, 83, widowed, barely left her porch. "I saw the trucks," she said softly. "Years ago. The ones with no plates. Sometimes I heard splashing, voices arguing." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I knew your father," she whispered. "He came to me 2 nights before he died. Said he'd seen something. Asked if I'd keep a photo envelope for him." My breath caught. "You still have it?" "I think so. If you want it." I was there within 15 minutes. She handed me an old yellowed envelope. Inside were 6 printed photos, grainy but clear. Men hauling barrels down a slope. A white truck. Janice, younger but unmistakable, standing beside it with a clipboard. Date stamped April 26, 2013, 2 days before my father died. That night, I emailed the photos to Rebecca and Donnie with one line. Now do you see? Rebecca replied within the hour. They were escalating. Donnie called twice, his tone serious. You just turned this from a contamination case into a potential wrongful death and conspiracy. I know, I said, and I'm ready. The next morning, Emily from WQLR arrived with her crew. You realize, she said, adjusting her mic, this could blow up statewide. Good, I said. Let it. Because now the entire community was watching, and the HOA was out of time. The barrel surfaced like something rising from a grave. Slow, reluctant, angry. When the claw broke the surface, cradling the rusted drum, everything stopped. Even Rebecca froze. It was a 55-gallon drum, dented and warped, no labels, just danger. She radioed her team. Containment protocol now. The smell hit next. Burnt rubber and rot. Rebecca scanned it with a meter. High volatility organic solvents. Possibly PCB-related. Federally banned material. Matches my father's timeline, I said quietly. I handed her Mrs. Beasley's photos. She flipped through them, her face hardening. This is enough for a criminal referral. You mean federal crime? She nodded. Over the next hour, hazmat teams arrived. They erected a full perimeter. Rebecca called in a secondary team. We're classifying this as restricted hazardous zone, she said. I walked back to my porch, shaking, not from fear but clarity. This was no longer about theories. It was real, criminal, and tied directly to the HOA. They hadn't just looked away, they'd sanctioned it. That evening, a dark sedan pulled in. A man in a suit showed his badge. Mr. Harlow, I'm Special Agent Lambert, EPA Criminal Investigations. May I come in? We talked for an hour. When he left, he said, I can't promise justice overnight, but this is enough to open a probe. There'll be subpoenas, interviews, maybe arrests. Good, I said. It's about time. Before leaving, Lambert turned back. One more thing. The firm that built around your lake, Bluestone Contracting, went bankrupt in 2014 after waste violations. But the contract behind your property? Still active. Meaning they built something out there, and not all of it's been found. I didn't sleep that night. By Friday, news vans lined the street. QLR ran drone footage of the dredge in the barrel. Emily's voiceover. An HOA in Pine Hollow may have spent the last decade hiding toxic waste, and a local man may have paid the price with his father's life. It exploded statewide. Janice tried to spin it with a press conference, but social media tore her apart. Residents posted memories, old complaints, pet deaths, rashes, smells. The truth flooded out. Then Emily released the photos. My father's handwriting read aloud. They're dumping something. If something happens to me, I want Luke to know. The town erupted. Support poured in. Mrs. Beasley brought cookies. Neighbors shared their stories. Kids planted protest signs, justice for the lake. Then the mayor called me. The city opened an inquiry. The state launched its own. Subpoenas hit the HOA board. Janice screamed at officers as they served her papers. By the next board meeting, residents stormed the clubhouse lawn. You buried poison under our feet, they shouted. The board fled. Emily caught it all on camera. Days later, the Attorney General stepped in. The HOA was finished. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The truth was speaking for me. When I finally stood at the lake again, the water was still. Not silent, but listening. Then came the morning headline. State files criminal charges against Pine Hollow HOA president. I stared at Janice's photo, cuffed, eyes hollow. The list of charges: illegal waste disposal, obstruction, tampering, and involuntary manslaughter. It wasn't victory. It was justice finally breathing. More board members resigned. Gloria apologized on live TV. Rick was served a subpoena at work. The HOA collapsed, and the people, they rose. The town took back control. Volunteers rebuilt the park. The EPA let me help with cleanup. That's when we found another barrel, this time sealed perfectly. Inside documents. Receipts, memos, proof that Janice ordered the dumping. It was the smoking gun. After that, indictments came fast. I testified publicly, reading my father's journal aloud. When I finished, the room was silent. Then an investigator stood up. Mr. Harlow, he said, on behalf of the state, we're sorry. The grand jury indicted Janice for environmental negligence, conspiracy, and manslaughter. The HOA was dissolved by court order. Every fine voided. Every complaint opened for review. Emily interviewed me one last time by the lake. "How does it feel to win?" she asked. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about ending something that never should have started." The story aired that night. Across the state, people began dredging their own lakes, literal and otherwise, because truth has weight. The first time I saw the lake ripple clean again, it was sunrise. Mist rose from silver-blue water. No oil, no stench, just life. It took 5 months. The EPA cleared it. Rebecca handed me the certificate. "It's yours now," she said. Officially clean. I rebuilt the dock. Carved a plaque. Robert Harlow, protector of the lake. Then I filed to make it public land. No HOA, no control. Just community. It passed unanimously. We planted wildflowers, built benches, brought fish back. Laughter returned to Pine Hollow. The fear was gone. Janice pled guilty in a deal and disappeared. No one missed her. The HOA's legacy died quietly, and peace returned. One evening, as the sun turned the water to gold, I stood beside Chase. "You think your dad would be proud?" he asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think he'd sit right here just like this." I cast a line into the lake. The water rippled gently. No secrets this time, no poison, just peace.